Okay, Alexander, we have some breaking news, and it is confirmed, and that is that Russia is pulling out of Snake Island. The Russian military, they're pulling out of Snake Island now. We've got two different versions of this story, and the Russian side of things saying that this is a goodwill gesture, and they're tying it into the exporting of grain and food. That is what the Russian military is giving for the reason that it's leaving Snake Island, a gesture of goodwill. That's a direct quote. And the Ukraine side of things, I'm on Business Insider actually, which is super pro Ukraine. They're saying pretty much that this is a victory for Ukraine, and the reason that they are leaving, that Russia is leaving, according to many Ukraine officials. Let me just take one person here from this article. According to Ukraine President Zelensky, Andrei Yermak, the head of the office of Ukraine President Zelensky, according to him, and a tweet, kaboom, no Russian troops on Snake Island anymore. Our armed forces did a great job, and the Ukraine Pivden South Operational Command, which is in the area, said during the night, as a result of another successful military operation carried out by our missile and artillery forces on the Snake Island, the enemy rushed to evacuate the remains of its garrison by two speedboats, and it looks like it has left the island completely. So, okay, expected. The Russians, I don't know, very interesting reason they give for leaving Snake Island, and of course the Ukraine side is going to celebrate this as a victory.
Yeah,
what's your take?
Yeah, and so is the Western media, Reuters. I've been reading Reuters, all of this. Now, I'm going to make my own quick observation. I have been saying for weeks, I don't understand what the great strategic significance of Snakes Island is. Now, I did a live stream on Locals yesterday. I got lots of responses, people explaining to me why Snakes Island is important, that you can build radar stations, that you can observe what's going on in all sorts of places. I'm still processing all of this information. But I'm going to say straight away, all of that looked to me for the long term. It doesn't seem to me that it has any immediate operational bearing on the ongoing war. And the other point I have been making repeatedly in program after program after program, and all you have to do is listen to our programs on the Duran, listen to my programs on my own channel, is that there is no logical sense in defending undefendable ground. That's what the Ukrainians do. Now, let's look at the situations, the specific situation on Snakes Island. First of all, this is one case where I unequivocally prefer the Ukrainian version to the Russian. I mean, I just don't buy the Russian. I think that the Russians, what they're saying makes absolutely no sense, actually. I mean, I don't see what relevance Snakes Island has to the grain shipments or anything of that kind. But I also think that Snakes Island was clearly undefendable. It is less than a kilometre square. It is completely uninhabited. Given its small size, you could only put a small garrison there. And given its small size, you could only store a limited amount of ammunition there. So you have your batteries of anti-aircraft systems, your Tor missile system and your Panzer system. They're limited. They're not strategic systems. As there was reports earlier that the Russians had placed an S-400 missile system on Snakes Island. That was never possible, and it never happened. I mean, if you look at the scale of the territory that the S-400 needs, it just wasn't a quarter of a place is smaller than a kilometre. It's just, you just wouldn't possibly house it. Impossible. Keeping this garrison on Snakes Island supplied meant that you had to send things continuously there by ship and by plane. This is an area which is within shelling distance of Ukrainian artillery located on Odessa. And inevitably, what would happen is the Ukrainians would send their shells, their missiles towards Snakes Island. the anti-aircraft defenses would do what they could to parry some of these missiles, but then they'd immediately get depleted. You'd have to send more ships to keep it resupplied. It's ultimately a kind of situation where you're constantly putting people at risk to keep a small garrison at risk in a uninhabited rock of no importance. So I think the Russian military, did exactly the right professional thing. They pulled their troops out of an undefendable, barren piece of rock. Now, talking about this as some great strategic victory from Ukraine's point of view, I don't see what it changes. And let's talk about what's been going on in another part of Ukraine. And as we both know, there's been a series of Russian advances in Donbass. Severodonetsk has been captured. Lysychansk is now very in the process of being captured. Now, read this. I'm taking this from Wikipedia. And it says this. This is what it says about Lysychansk. Together with the cities of Severodonetsk, Rubizhne, and Kremina, and the nearest towns, the Lysychansk area constitutes a major urban and industrial hub of the Donbass area, with a population of about 353,000 as of 2009. So, Ukraine is about to lose a major urban and industrial hub in Donbass, its most important industrial region, and Ukraine has recaptured a uninhabited piece of bare rock with which is less than a square kilometre in size. Are you seriously going to tell me that capturing that uninhabited piece of rock is a major strategic victory, and the loss of Lysychansk, Severodonetsk, all those other places, and I took all that from Wikipedia, that's not some vastly greater strategic defeat? I mean, just think about it and compare the two, and I think you get a clear understanding of what the Russians have done and of what is really important in this war and what is not.
Yeah, I completely agree. Just a couple of things to put some more context to this. Snake Island is actually much closer to Romania than it is to Odessa, and a lot of people, myself included in the past, have kind of tied Snake Island to Odessa to a certain extent. I think that's wrong. It's actually quite far away from Odessa, to be quite honest, than it is to Romania. I mean, it's much closer to Romania, and historically, actually, the island is more tied into Romania, I believe, from a historic perspective. Another reason why I believe Russia might have left Snake Island, outside of the reasons that you gave, I think they probably said, you know what, Ukraine is so erratic, the military is so erratic, and they're sending, missiles, and they're hitting, they're trying to hit Snake Island without much success, to the point that they're taking out oil rigs and they're jeopardizing civilian lives as well. So it's really not worth, being here. So I think the oil rig incident may have played a factor there as well. The one big question that I have with this, and I agree, there's no reason, actually two questions. There's no reason for Russia to have been at Snake Island. Two questions that I have, though, and this is from the Russian messaging side of things. We know what Ukraine, the collective West, is going to do. Snake Island is a sexy sounding name. A lot of people are going to remember it. Snakes on a plane, and snakes, and Snake Island, and the cinema and the movies. It's very Hollywood, and obviously Zelensky and his team and all the script writers in DC, they're going to have a good time creating a narrative around Snake Island. We all know it, and that's fine. They'll do their 1 week of media spin with Snake Island, and everyone will remember it. The great victory at Snake Island, and it sticks in the mind. Lysychansk, Severodonetsk doesn't really roll off the tongue. Anyway, let me get back to my two questions as we wrap up this video. The first question is, if this rock wasn't of such importance, why did Russia stay there for 4 months? Was it some sort of feint? Did Russia get sucked into the PR of it all? Was this a way, going back to the feint, was this a way to perhaps distract Zelensky and maybe have all these weapons firing on Snake Island as a way to say, just keep them occupied over there. We're seeing what these U.S. weapons can do. They're expending these U.S. weapons that could be brought to the east. I don't know, maybe something along those lines. So was it a feint? Was it a distraction? Did the Russians get sucked into the media PR spin of things? And my other question and comment is why such poor messaging from the Russian side? Why do you have to tie this into grain? And I'll tell you why I don't like this BS excuse from the Russian military. We know the Russians have terrible media and PR messaging. We know that, at least with regards to this conflict. When you tie it into grain, to me, it's almost like an admission that you're blockading grain exports in a way as well. You know what I mean? It's like saying, okay, all the way up until now, you couldn't export grain because we were holding Snake Island. Now that we're not holding Snake Island, all of a sudden, Ukraine, the collective West, can now ship out all this grain. And so they're going to say, you see, Russians really were blockading the grain because they had these 10 S-400s on Snake Island, and they had these battleships and this occupation on Snake Island, and now they're leaving it because of the heroic efforts of Zelensky. And the reason he's freeing Snake Island is because Zelensky wants to feed the world, and he sees the importance of it, and now we can finally get these ships out and feed the world. It's just such a bad excuse. I would have much preferred if the Russians just said what you said in the opening segment. Look, this rock is useless. We were there for 4 months to distract the Ukraine military. They fell for it. Now we're leaving. They also took out some oil rigs, and it was just a pain in the ass, and it cost us a lot of money. And there's no reason to be there because we're crushing it in Donbass. There you have the messaging. How come they don't contact us? How come they're not contacting us so you can give them some messaging?
I completely agree. I think that's exactly what the Russians should have said. It's always better to tell the truth. I mean, especially when the truth is entirely to your advantage. And I absolutely agree that bringing the grain issue into this thing, as you rightly say, it's going to be spun now as a admission that it is indeed Russia that's been blockading the port of Odessa, which is, of course, I mean, it simply isn't true. But anyway, that's what people are going to say. Russia utterly sucks at PR. They just don't get it at all. And what seems incredible about this is that they don't get any better at it. I mean, you'd have thought that, after failure after failure after failure, they'd actually learn something. But they just don't seem to get any better. They don't really seem to have any understanding of how to do it. Now, one has to qualify this because I gather that within Russia itself, they do know how to communicate to the Russian people and all of that. But they don't seem to understand that it's just not just your own people you've got to talk to sometimes, but also the world as well. And they just don't seem to have any idea how to do it. And I just don't understand. I mean, I really don't understand why they can't and why they haven't in this case. Now, why did they stay there for 4 months? I think they stayed there for 4 months because they could. It's as simple as that. I mean, they captured it right at the beginning. It was a very easy place to take. There wasn't a real garrison. There were just some, Russian, Ukrainian border guards there. That whole story about the, putting up a fight to the death when in fact it was just ridiculous. I mean, they were all surrendered almost instantly. So, by all means, stay there. And I think that nobody wants to leave territory which you've captured. And I think that as, the war progressed, things were to some extent, it was an easy place to hold because the Ukrainians weren't focusing too much on it initially in the early stages of the war. And then from May, the Ukrainians began to take a bigger and bigger interest. And I think that there's probably been a long discussion within the Russian military about what to do with this place. Do you reinforce it and try to hold it in the hope that the Ukrainians will lose interest in it, or do you go on defending it? And I think the realists finally prevailed, and they said, look, this isn't really a place which is worth all the trouble of keeping. And you're absolutely right. All this fighting over Snake Island is leading to Ukrainian tantrums. They're taking out oil facilities and other things, and that's creating an escalation. So I think somebody eventually took the decision, this doesn't make any sense militarily, let's pull out. But it's important to say, through March and April, very little was happening around Snake Island. I mean, so that it's there's been the shift. I think the more interesting question is why the Ukrainians have been so obsessed with it.
I'll answer that. I mean, we've answered that in the past. Actually, it's because they need a victory, and this is an easy victory. I think you actually answered that on your Locals live stream last night as well. It's just an easy victory for them, and it's good timing for them right now, given Lizzie Chansk and everything that's happening. This will be a good PR distraction for everyone that's still in the belief that Ukraine is winning this conflict. Okay, this is good red meat to feed them.
And this is exactly what you were saying. This is exactly the point I was going to make, because this is the Ukrainian military, or rather political leadership, is essentially a PR outfit. So, you lose a major battle in Donbass. What do? You capture an uninhabited piece of rock in the middle of the sea, which has, as you rightly said, a sexy name. And you then spin it as the great victory. And of course it will work, because the Ukrainians do get, the one thing they do get is media spin, public relations, propaganda, if you like to call it. But you remember always, propaganda is always an important part of war. The Ukrainians know how to do it. The Russians, I mean, they not only don't know how to do it, but they don't even learn, which is just very weird.
Yeah, and look, I mean, it's natural that Zelensky is going to be good at these propaganda scripts, because number one, he's got the U.S., the U.K., Hollywood, the DC think tanks. They're all writing stuff for him. So okay, obviously that's a huge advantage. He also is a clown puppet actor. I mean, his whole entourage, his whole administration are writers and directors and script writers out of Stovich. All these guys are basically, the equivalent of Hollywood in Ukraine. So they get this as well. They're very comfortable with writing these types of scripts. Snake Island, the title writes itself. I mean, you don't really need to do much there either. It's so easy to get this narrative in place. My final question is, like someone like Maria Zakharova is super good at social media. Like, she gets it. She understands social media. She knows how to use it. She's very sharp. Lavrov is very sharp. It seems like the foreign ministry understands how to use social media and PR much, much better than the military side of things. That also makes sense. It is the foreign ministry, so obviously they're more in tune with speaking to an international audience. How come the defense ministry doesn't consult like Maria Zakharova's office and say, how should we spin this? The best way would have been, something like what you said. Look, it's everything you said, and also add in there, we're giving this to Zelensky, and we're going to let his script writers, literally they could have said this, we're going to let his script writers and the Hollywood puppeteers write their little Hollywood film about our abandonment of Snake Island. I mean, they could have actually thrown that in there as kind of, a poke. That's how you use, Twitters and Telegrams and all these things. Foreign ministry gets it. The foreign ministry understands it. The Defense Department is clueless.
It's completely clueless. And I mean, one almost gets the sense that, they almost take pride in the fact that they're bad at it. I mean, it's so persistent and so persistently bad that, it just doesn't, I don't understand why they don't grasp the fact that PR, when all is said and done, is a part of war. Obviously, it's not the most important part of war. Winning battles is. But, controlling the narrative today, unfortunately, that's the reality. That's what you have to do. Zaharova has done it. Does it well, as you say. Lavrov does it well. You see lots of anger in the West about the fact that, most of the world has been quietly siding with Russia over this conflict. And people are saying in the West, how is it that the Russians have been able to win over people in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia? Well, the reason they're doing it is because their foreign ministry does its job. But the defense ministry doesn't know how to do its job, its media job at all. And I have to say this, neither ultimately does the Kremlin. The real center of power, the information that you get from the Kremlin, the way it explains things. Well, Peskov had his day. He used to be a good spokesman. I'll get back in the early 2000s, in that kind of world, he was good at his job. But he's completely out of date now. He's not really up to handling these constant flow of events in the modern world. You need a much sharper figure as Zaharova in charge of the Kremlin operation as well. But there it is. I mean, I can't explain. I mean, I don't know. I can't explain it. Is it the continuing legacy of the Soviet tradition of utter secrecy about everything? Is it something that goes back even further, that Russians don't do PR, it's somehow beneath them? But whatever it is, it does exact a price. And as you said, as for why the Ukrainians focused on Snake Island, well, you gave the answer. It's an easy victory. It's a big PR win. They understand perfectly well. You've got to find some way of distracting from the gathering disaster in Donbass. So you talk about how you liberated the island of snakes. This is it's easy to do.
Yeah. All right. We will leave it there. The Duran.locals.com, everybody, and go to the Duran shop, 10% off. Use the code GOODDAY.